Thank you for joining us for this spotlight on Canadian talent at TIFF, which is brought to you by Telefilm Canada. Our guest today is filmmaker Charles Officer. A dozen years have passed since Officer made his feature debut with Nurse Fighter Boy, and since then, he has directed episodic TV and crucial documentaries like The Skin We're In and Unarmed Verses. Officer is making his return to fiction filmmaking with the Killas Escape, which is having its world premiere at TIFF. The film is about a Toronto man in the drug game trying to pull a young teen out of that life over the course of one intense night. Let's have a look at Akilla's Escape.
You know what this is? Are you Area 6? He running with Area 6 generals. Word is, they affiliated with Jamaican Massive. Garrison Army. You know what that means? So you a killer, huh? You done got yourself some grown man shit, shorty. These little baby gangsters getting baby. Kingsway Lions riding with you. Just tell me what you want to do.
Tell me where to find him.
So that was Akilla's Escape. Let's bring in the filmmaker, Charles Officer. Charles, how are you doing?
I'm great, Rad. How are you doing?
I'm good. So Charles, talk to me about kind of the inception, the genesis of the story. Like, where did this story come from?
Killas Escape. Yeah, this story came. It's funny. It's been in my bones for a long time because in terms of the question and the sort of space I was looking to around the cycle of violence that's really specifically devastating young Black boys over generations, and being Jamaican and understanding this sort of political route to a lot of the violence that's happening in this island. I really wanted to draw this connection to how this violence actually is exported. Jamaica to New York to Toronto. The boys that I worked with over the years within the city. There was always this question about the corporation, which is organized crime, and those employees within it. And you go really down the line, and the street level employees, they succumb to this. They're expendable. They're pawns in this whole thing. So I was looking at the idea of the politics behind violence and where that genesis comes through. So for me, Akilla became like, one part origin story, one part reckoning story. And the question about when one man's experience, he's accumulated these experiences, and when he can look at himself in another boy, what is that choice to end that cycle? Again, like just societally and communally, it's just like folks would say, okay, the government will fund an art program or this program and that program, and I was really posing that question about who holds themselves accountable in this cycle of violence. If Black boys are in it, then when do they become men, and when do they see it, and when do they end it? So that was the sort of core of it, and I just felt like I've always been very, very fascinated, interested in the shower posse in Jamaica and the birth of that, and how the political structure in Jamaica really empowered the organized crime, and then how that trickles through generations. And so it was really about the idea of generational violence, the cycle of it, and how was I going to articulate that in a story where it's the onus is on the man who's been through it to either end it or continue it.
Well, then tell me, like, so when you're developing that story, because you have a co-writer here, right? It's what's her name? Wendy Motion Brathwaite. Is that how I say it?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yes. Motion. She's yes. Go ahead.
No. So yeah, talk to me. Like, okay, when did you bring her in? What was like, and what, like, why did you have to bring her in, so to speak? Like, how did the developing the story with her then? How did that work?
Yeah, I mean, this is the crazy thing about this film. When I made Nurse Fighter Boy, it came out 2008, 2009, and Mongrel Media and Sienna Films put together a writing lab. They invited me to participate. some amazing writers. I was very fresh, and the objective was to write a script that was under $2 million and develop something. Killas Escape was that script. So I wrote the first draft in 2010.
Oh.
Right. And I was green. I didn't know how to produce. And so I continued with this project, went with producers. It didn't work out, lost a project, had to legally get my own project back. And then I shelved it for a while because the climate was, I'll be honest with you, is when I was pitching this project, there was absolutely zero interest in terms of, I was even told, Charles, you're very talented. You have a gift of sensitivity and emotion, but you really should stay away from Black violence stories.
Wow. Yeah.
So my question was, so if I have all these skills and all this sort of, this thing that you see, why do you think I would approach this story any differently? Mm-hmm. There's more to this than Black violence. And so I was frustrated and went away for a while and vowed that I will not make a fiction feature film until I know how to produce it myself. Took some time, came back to this project, got a little more development funds. And at that time, I directed a play written by Motion. And she was someone who I loved from the theater, who I really wanted to see transition into film and TV. And so I invited her to co-write with me because I was getting busy with some directing projects. So she came on board about maybe 3 years ago. And it was great because I had my eye out for female writers and Black writers and who often don't get to write about like gritty crime stories. So Motion came on board and I love her perspective on the world. She's also a spoken word poet. She's a performer herself. When she'd come back and rewrite some scenes and stuff, I'd be like, you're harder than me, man. Like she just has this understanding of this story, and she's a mother herself with a young son and all this sort of thing that she was concerned about in the themes of the film. It connected with her. So Motion was just a great person. And as I'm getting older and even as writing, I really welcome having a writing partner. It just really helps to lessen the load and having someone to creatively jam with. And so she's a wonderful collaborator.
Sorry, now I'm angry. Was that a white person that told you that? A decision maker? Yeah, absolutely. So white person. Let's hone in on what year that was about not wanting to make movies about Black violence.
That was probably around 2012.
So the summer of the Danzig shooting.
Exactly.
It's like
bang, bang, bang.
Yeah.
And it's been interesting just being in this business and even, speaking with financiers about this project. It was a challenge. It took me this long to make something for not a lot,
mm-hmm.
And still, where the value of a story like this, whether or not you get it or not, I mean, I'm still talking about the lives of Black boys. Mm-hmm. And now we're at this time where everyone's kind of standing up after seeing such this horrific, expression of violence in America.
Mm-hmm.
But it's happening here too.
Yeah.
Not to the same amount of frequency, but it shouldn't, negate the fact that it's happening. So that value of a point of view from filmmakers and stories that are important to us, that we're trying to talk about within the community, it's really taking a lot of conversations and a lot of patience and a lot of convincing to get Akilla made.
Yeah. And then, let's talk about then, I mean, because you Nurse Fighter Boy, that was a dozen years ago, brother.
Yeah.
Right? That was then you're trying to get this movie made. You went into documentary. And you specifically, your documentaries were in a reaction to kind of the Black Lives Matters movement. We're talking about The Skin We're In and Unarmed Verses. Now, did making those documentaries help shape this story in any way? And in terms of even being in touch with those communities and embedding yourself within those communities, what was the influence those documentaries had on this film?
Yeah, massive. Because I felt like, as a Black filmmaker, there's this idea of, I had no idea that I was ever going to make a documentary when I started this journey. So, but that introduction to the form really opened my mind to it's part of the homework that you do when you're doing fiction. You go into the real world. You sometimes find consultants or people. You get into talk with them, and making those films actually really solidified why this film was important for me to make as fiction. I was working in communities where I kind of had written about previously when I was writing Nurse Fighter Boy, Killas Escape, and then working Unarmed Verses. I was even like, when I was making Unarmed Verses, I was looking at youth that I wanted to cast for Akilla. I even brought in some youth from the neighborhood. And it's just like these things that are in our bones that we want to speak to, that we may want to fictionalize. You know, broadcasters and institutions of financial institutions, they're more comfortable with greenlighting a documentary because it's less expensive. There's less risk, but some stories definitely, I feel, really need to be fictionalized. And I felt like those experiences working with Desmond, going across the country, and also it's also the idea of audience, making these documentaries and working within these communities in the city and across the country just reaffirmed to me that a story like Akilla, there's an audience for it. And I'm making it for them. So when you're in with real people, I think you have a whole other responsibility than when you're making, fiction. And I felt like it was such it was my fuel. It was also me learning how to, making dogs people think it's a scramble. It's crazy. You have less days. So my producing skills as well were being honed in documentary. And so it was really, every piece I felt like was helping me to get deeper into why I want to make this film. Yeah.
It's interesting. I mean, because I think what these like what you said, I mean, you can grasp for more truth in a fiction film, because what these people don't understand is when you go into the neighborhoods and talk to these people, they can't be fully honest because they have to be worried about retribution. Like that's what these people don't seem to get, right? So you have to access that fiction storytelling to kind of reach the things that we can't say on in camera. So so tell me about this cast, because this cast is not all from one place. You had to go all over the world for this cast. So talk to me about them.
Yeah, it was. I've known Saul Williams since when I first saw him in Slam many years ago. When I went to theater school in New York, I used to go to New York Cafe and listen to poets, and saw this dude, and he's amazing. Fell in love with him. See him in this film. He's in Toronto. I'm sitting in the audience. He somehow sees me. I see him, and we're like, "What's up?" And through our lives, we reconnect. A lot of my friends are in music, and we connected. And as I was writing this, I was just kind of keeping it quiet in a way, and then but always having him in mind to play this role. And so when I was ready, kind of sent him the script, and he immediately took to it and said yes. So I was blessed to have Saul Williams, who is just a majestic human being, and I wanted that spirit. It's something about casting, it's about the spirit of the human being that I really want to bring onto a set. This young man, Tamela, who I worked with many years ago when he was like 13, I executive produced a short film called A Man's Story that Motion wrote. So there was a team there that was being pulled together, and saw this young lad, and was really impressed with his skill sets. And when I worked on the television series 21 Thunder, he was cast as the young boy in that show. So I'd worked with him before, and he's just this generational talent. I really, Tamela is an exquisite young human being, and I thought, oh, it'd be amazing if this young man got to meet Saul, just as human beings. Saul is someone that I think would inspire him as a young actor, encourage him, his vibe. And a friend of mine, Kelly Fife Marsh, she made a short film that had Denisha Pendergrass in it, who's Bob Marley's granddaughter. And I'd seen the short film, but I'd also been following Denisha as an activist. Denisha is someone who I was a fan of before she met me. Just again, as a human being, what she stands for, the work she's doing out there, her voice, and her lineage. I mean, the Marleys is just like, and if I can get anywhere close to them, it's a blessing. So the thing is that she's Jamaican. She just actually literally moved to Canada to be with her partner, literally like just as we started casting.
Right.
And so, but she had her status, but it was still within the actors union and so on and so forth. It was a tricky thing because, of a budget level of a film like this, you have to go into ACTRA where there are restrictions on how many non-Canadians you can bring into the film. By that time, we'd already reached out to Vic Mensa, Rock Nation, recording artist, amazing artist from Chicago, American, who actually grew up with my producer, Jake Yanowski, in Chicago.
Mm-hmm.
The crazy thing is that Saul Williams is Vic Mensa's mentor. So when we reached out to Vic and said, hey, there's this role we'd love you to play, Saul's in it, he was like, I'm in.
Right.
But that gave me 2 Americans and then this woman who's, just come out of Jamaica, which is against all the ACTRA rules. So I had to go actually into ACTRA and tell them that, this film has 26 speaking roles for people of color in them. Name me a film in this country that has had that many.
Right.
So if by me having these 2 Americans, if you think that's taking away from employing people of color, well, then I'm not the person to be talking to. Because
Right.
I'm actually providing those jobs, right? And so they actually made a new rule.
Interesting. What's the new rule?
The rule was, and it's not really out there in a certain way because it's a case-by-case thing, but there is something implemented that for a film of a certain size where you have to do like a CPIP program, it means you get a discounted rate on actors. You're allowed to have more than one non-American, non-Canadian.
Okay, wow. Well, okay, so look, you got this movie made somehow, some ways, after so much time, but now you're bringing it to a film festival, right? And I think it's interesting to note that you're bringing it to the film festival 25 years after the Toronto Film Festival founded Planet Africa, right? And I'm bringing this up because Planet Africa is a program to kind of vault films by the Black diaspora for people to take them seriously. And because we are having this conversation, especially even recently with the Criterion Collection, just about how the Criterion Collection doesn't even include Black filmmakers. It's actually a very minuscule, embarrassing amount of Black filmmakers, all because the film festival scene, the arts scene, the film critic scenes, everything, the lens is always from a very white community. So for you, when you bring your film like this to a film festival, what does it take for you to get your film into this kind of a festival? And what is the feeling? Is it excitement, but is it also fear of who is going to see this film and how they're going to receive it?
Absolutely. I mean, very, very, it's an excellent question because, operating in a business and that is a creative one, that so few programmers of color that have that sort of power. And what we're talking about, even criteria, it's programming. Essentially, it's like what is out there, especially if you're talking about that level of Criterion, library or catalog, but also with film festivals. These are self-proclaimed cinephiles who love cinema, who understand, the effect it has, the importance of that exposure for films, filmmakers to have an opportunity to sell their film, expose it but then it's in this sort of world where you have very few people to review your film, to have that lens, to have that perspective. And I think this is a very important thing right now. I was sweating like crazy. I was so nervous about this film getting into TIFF because I've had some other experiences where it didn't go my way. And being from Toronto and understanding the value of telling these stories about this city, I was really, really nervous that this film was going to get overlooked simply because there's no one that I really truly felt is going to find the value. And especially in this time when there was such a minimal selected group of films that are being selected this year, I was, really, really, really worried. I feel grateful and I love Planet Africa because that was my introduction as well to the TIFF as well. When I came with my short films, some of the best parties, the experiences that I had with community there, it changed me as a filmmaker. Planet Africa did that for me. So that value of maybe seeing one filmmaker over the number of years to continue and feel inspired to go and continue. And here I am having a film I could have quit a long time ago. But I have those memories of Planet Africa and the community and what I felt that there was somewhere, let's be real, like film is elitist. The art world is elitist. It hasn't welcomed people like you and me with open arms. And we've had to fight for space, and we've had to, this is true for any young filmmaker coming up. This is what you're going to, even this point of reckoning, this is not going to just disappear. Because until the ideology and the sort of consciousness of the value of our stories, and that we have people in positions to actually validate them, to examine them and to look at them in a specific way, we won't really have the sort of change that people are asking for. You can't ask the same individuals to be learning or unlearning things and asking them to lead at the same time. So I think that's a big ask. I'm nervous about this film, but I'll be, getting on the world, because there is a whole thing about market, and it's something that I've constantly always heard about my work is like, well, what's the market? Who's this for? And I'm like, well, you're asking this question because you don't see it as a part of connecting to the audience that you know. But that audience for me includes my nephew, my brothers, my cousins, the people who are in the film. We are a valid audience. Now, going to TIFF, I've also learned that I let things go. I feel like I've kind of given birth to something. I have to put out in the world and see how people are going to treat this child. Some are going to kick it. Some might love it. Some might be, I have no idea what this is. And I think I just have to embrace it, because at the end of the day, I stand by my intentions of why I made this film, who I want to put on screen, all those reasons for the talent that is right here in the city that I want to see exposed. Maya Bankovic, who shot the film, women don't get to shoot these sort of crime dramas so much. I've actually had individuals say, oh my God, Maya Bankovic shot this? And I'm like, yeah, she's an incredible artist. So I'm speaking on a lot of things with all the layers of this film, but I hope that it's embraced at TIFF. I don't get overly, I manage my expectations, let's just say.
Well, all right, well, I'm rooting for you, brother. But so thank you so much for taking part of this conversation, and I'm going to be seeing you around this festival, right?
Absolutely, and thank you again for taking the time. Always amazing to talk with you and your insight, brother. Really appreciate it.
Thank you. And joining us now are filmmakers Chin-Yee and Chase Joynt. They are at TIFF with the documentary No Ordinary Man, which is a look at the life and legacy of jazz musician Billy Tipton and what he meant to artists in the trans community. Let's have a look at No Ordinary Man.
How would I summarize the story of Billy Tipton? He was a trans-masculine jazz musician. Pretty simple.
The first phrase that always comes to my mind is the gentleman's gentleman. Just the consummate professional and the gentleman's gentleman.
The first time that I learned about Billy Tipton was probably 2003 or 2004. Just before I started my medical transition, I was doing a ton of research at that point. And so I wanted to learn about my ancestors essentially that came before me.
In a way, Billy has been with me in sort of the background before my transition, and thinking about him again from the place of being a trans man was very interesting for me, because I think I had held him, in just a sort of general context of queerness prior to that.
Aisling and Chase, welcome and thank you for joining us. How are you?
Thanks. Doing well. How are you doing?
I'm good. I'm good. I mean, we're at TIFF. We're on a stage. We have a whole audience listening to us right now. Let's imagine
Really?
that. No ordinary TIFF. Let's call it that, right? And now you got a documentary. We got No Ordinary Man. Let me ask you now, Aisling, you were part of this project early on. It was just you and the producers, and this is at a point where you knew you were making a documentary about Billy Tipton, but at this point the documentary hadn't taken any kind of shape or form as yet. So talk to me about that kind of creative process from there, and how you went about developing this project.
Yeah, so the project really, it was being developed by Sarah Spring at Parabola Films for a little while. She had been interested in learning more about Billy Tipton and his legacy. So when I came on board, it was also kind of in the same vein. I was really curious about about this person who has this disputed identity and story, and there was lots of different ways that he was being framed, but it became quite clear early on that he was living his life as a trans man, and as somebody who's not trans, and that's not my experience, it was quite evident that it would need to be a project that was a creative collaboration with trans artists. So that's when Amos Mack, my co-writer, came on board, and Chase came on board to co-direct it with me. And so really, once the three of us got together, it was the birth of our film as it stands today.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's interesting because these people, Amos Mack and Chase, both you came on board. A lot of the excuses I hear when people are coming up with excuses for the lack of representation behind the scenes in their film, a lot of them say, "Oh, the talent isn't there. The talent isn't ready yet." Chase, what do you got to say about that?
Yeah.
When you hear those excuses?
How much time do you have? I feel, it's an easy thing to say. Part of there's no one there is because people haven't been offered the same access points early on in their careers to develop their skill sets. So it's not that there are no trans directors, it's that people haven't necessarily come of age through the most recognizable routes of schooling and networks. We are in an industry full of trans and non-binary talent, and I think are really seeing some of that talent on screen and off screen in ways that we haven't in the decades prior. And so joining this team to tell the story about Billy Tipton was not only just an exciting opportunity to tell a complex story about trans history, but also to say, look at all this talent. Welcome to the world of trans masculine actors who are all excited to step toward what it could mean to think about Billy Tipton together from this very contemporary moment. And to say that we have writers, we have directors, but it's not just about trans people telling trans stories. It's about people collaborating to tell stories about dynamic, underexplored histories and people.
Yeah. Well, you have a very unique approach to this documentary. Like I said in the introduction, no ordinary documentary either. It's not, you don't give us an A to B kind of profile of Billy Tipton. It's not a history of Billy Tipton. It is, like you said, there's a community of trans actors and artists who are speaking to that legacy. They're all chiming in and they're all interpreting it. At what point did that shape begin to take form? How did that develop?
It started pretty early on in the writing and development phase of it, where there's no moving images of Billy Tipton. So there wasn't an archive that we kind of pull from him, like here he is performing here and here and there. There was just, there were photos of him. There was a biography that was written about him by a woman named Diane Middlebrook. That's, we address her problematic ways of gendering Billy in the film. But also there was some of his recordings from his rehearsals and stuff like that in his albums. But there wasn't any moving images of him that we could draw from. So then it was like, okay, there's whatever we put out into the world will be what people think about Billy as a person. What will be attached to Billy's image forever. So that's a lot of responsibility. And so when we were conceiving this project, I was like, well, everyone comes to these things, everyone comes to the table with a bias, no matter what their experience is. And are we going to say that how we represent Billy with one actor and one recreation is the way that Billy should be remembered forever and for the rest of time? So that's where it became this process of reflection of there's many different ways to project there's many different stories you can project onto Billy. He's not here to tell his story. So let's explore the different avenues and experiences through this way that an actor has to inhabit a person by asking the questions, what would this person be feeling like here? How would this person react to this thing? So we wrote out these different scenes and we were able to kind of play with it, like wrote out different scenes from his life that we had learned about. And instead of doing kind of a recreation or something cheesy, like an Unsolved Mysteries style of like smoky, walk through a club kind of situation, we made that process and discovery as part of the way we can tell this story from multiple points of view, which was way more fun too,
So Chase, when I watched this film, the importance of authorship, it really struck me. Like having someone within the community deep in the conversation really stands out, and especially in the scenes where you have trans actors auditioning to play Billy Tipton. And in order to play Billy Tipton, you have one actor named Marquise who he really talks through like his own experiences, what would be going on in his head if he was in that position, and trying to translate that into Billy's experience and bringing out Billy's experience that way. So that really, I felt, deepened the conversation. And it also, it pointed out to me again why it's so crucial to have the community that is being represented in front of the camera and also behind the camera, and within the skin of the actor.
So, one of the things that I love so much about that scene in particular is it's an example of Aisling and Amos's work as writers, Aisling and my work as directors, and Marquise's work as an actor coming together to produce new meaning in the room. So everyone had their expectations of this scene, and no one could have anticipated the way that Marquise walked toward that scene with his own personal experience. And I really feel like it's an emblematic moment in the film of the broader method.
Okay. Well, now the other thing about that scene though is Marquise is Black. Okay, Billy Tipton was not Black, and and this is what is playing out in this film. Like in terms of the casting, you are making sure to represent the trans community with all these trans artists, but you are also opening the doors to so many other races and calling. So can you talk to me about why you made that choice and why this film benefited from that choice?
Yeah, the film, the casting and the auditions and the casting room and the whole process of making that whole process is part of making the documentary. So it was about showing an array of different experiences and transmasculine talent from many different walks of life. So we're not actually creating a fictionalized version that's supposed to be, physically true to form of what Billy looked like, because then, essentially almost none of those guys could play Billy Tipton, like he was a 5'4", like little guy from the South, So in terms of removing some of these ideas that only a certain type of person can play another type of person, we're removing it all to just have the discussion on look at the talent, look at the experience, look at what all these people can bring to the table when given the chance, So that's my perspective on it. Chase?
Yeah, and I think too, the casting call was for a documentary explicitly. And what that means is that the people who self-selected to tape and then arrive in the room were coming with an investment to think out loud with others about what it would mean to tell a story about transmasculine history. And so I think Marquise, who identifies as a Black transmasculine person, is bringing his own embodied personal perspective to what's at stake being a body in that room telling these stories. And he's an example of one of many in the film who do it from different socio-political and identificatory locations.
Well then, talk to me when we often have these conversations again about authorship, about making sure the right community is represented, but talk to me about making sure that you are creating a safe space for these voices to be heard, because I think oftentimes people who are brought in can worry about being tokenized within these productions. They could worry about being kind of paraded around as, oh, here I am, here we're doing our due diligence when it comes to representation. How do you make sure that those voices are nurtured and feel safe to really express themselves?
Well, and again, I can only speak from my perspective on this, but it was homegrown, it wasn't like it was an afterthought to have trans people involved in this film, so it was, I think there was a lot, with Amos coming on board and Chase coming on board and myself in where I stand in the filmmaking community, I think there was a trust there on who we are as individuals and our own experiences, And Chase, you can speak closer to that, because Chase was also the director. Like when we were there on set every single day with each other, but we also split off our different tasks and talents in order to like really maximize on what our skill sets are and what we both bring to the table. And so when there was during the interviews, Chase was the director who was doing the sit down interviews, and I was the one working more with the crew and making sure that it looked like it should. So I think there's a discussion of community there that I was happy to take a back seat to.
And I think that's part of the reason why we moved toward making visible the production of the film itself, which is to continue to account for our own positions on and off camera. And, I think that the idea of a safe space is a fantasy. I think what we can do is be as explicit as possible about our own intentions and our own limitations, and create as many opportunities for people to step toward our project or to step away, and to feel really clear that people have agency and people have choice, and that we want to honor that. There is no gotcha. I mean, what is a film about trans without a gotcha moment? Our whole thing is pushing back against the kind of narrative revisioning that happens time and time again to trans and gender nonconforming subjects on screen. And so how can we be really accountable to that and to try and move differently together?
Chase, your short films, are they documentaries as well, or are they fiction? They're all documentaries?
They
Okay.
are.
So you've worked then, I guess, strictly in the documentary realm, whereas Aisling, she just can't make up her mind. First of all, she's a producer on Rhymes for Young Ghouls, and she's also produced some documentaries. And then, just last year, she was at TIFF with a fiction feature film that she directed, The Rest of Us, and now she's back into the documentary train. There's two questions in this. I want to talk about, like, is there a monumental shift in gears when you're shifting from narrative to documentary? And then talking about, like, kind of when you're forced to shoot within 9 days, how much planning does it take to get to that point? And what do you need to make sure when you're preparing to shoot, and how light on your feet do you have to be after you shoot?
It's not a monumental shift. I mean, it's logistically different to make a documentary and a fiction film, but this one was not the type of documentary where we're embedding and spending a year and a half with a family and just sort of shooting on the fly everything. Like, it was very, very planned out, because we had sit down interviews. We had them the ironic thing is like The Rest of Us, I shot handheld, available light in a very documentary, naturalistic style. And this was a 2-camera setup with, on tripods and with lighting. So it was like, that was much more controlled and staged in a way than I did on the fiction film. But I mean, we're still telling the story about someone's life, and it's still, there's still a lot of different personalities and characters in the storytelling. So it's just telling a human story with whatever means and what type of media you've decided to use for that storytelling. So I don't think that there's too much of a difference beyond the fact that logistically it's obviously a much smaller team. It's a different type of budget. It's a different type of process in that regard. But yeah, I mean, in terms of like us having limited shooting days, like I don't know a single documentary that's ever shot, a feature film documentary that's ever shot in 9 days. So, luckily, because we had it set up as like, we had casting and interviews in Los Angeles and in New York City, and we went to Spokane, Washington to go be with Billy Tipton's son, for 3 or 4 days. And that's what we kind of had. And then we had to work, then it was like gathering the archival material and the photos and stuff like that to really craft the story in the edit. And that's quite normal for a documentary, is that you're doing a lot of the screenwriting and the crafting in post-production. So we were in post for quite a while after we finished.
So look, Chase, you've been to Tribeca with your short films. This is your first time at TIFF. Aisling's a bit of a veteran at TIFF. She's been here as a producer. She's been here last year, just premiered The Rest of Us as a director. She's back again this year. And I met Aisling at TIFF when she didn't even have a film. So talk to me about how do you wield a film festival to your best advantage? How do you get your film into a festival, first of all, but even if you're not having a film, what do you do to take advantage of a film festival as a young filmmaker?
It's a great question. And it's an interesting question to answer on Zoom with you today. You know, I'm a big fan of showing up. I'm a big fan of showing up in space, showing up in rooms, showing up in conversations, showing up in the work, and building relationships. I think, you know, as a trans maker, I know that there aren't hundreds of trans makers walking around TIFF. And so really trying to work and network with those who are closest in our networked communities and to break open space. I think it matters to, you know, I consider myself to be of a legacy of people that extends from John Grayson and, you know, experimental Canadian makers who were making space in big mainstream industrial international film festivals when I was young, not making anything. And so trying to always think about how projects can open up space for projects in the future.
Thank you, Aisling and Chase, and thank you, Telefilm Canada, for hosting this spotlight on Canadian talent. Thank you for everyone who's attending, and please enjoy the rest of the Toronto International Film Festival. So joining me now is filmmaker Tracey Deer. You may know Tracey as an executive producer on Mohawk Girls and Anne with an E, but now she's the feature film director behind Beans, which is having its world premiere at TIFF. Beans is a coming-of-age story set during the 1990 Oka crisis, when the Mohawk Nation took a stand against heavily armed Canadian forces to protect their land from further encroachment. Let's have a look at Beans.
My name is Dikahandekwa. Or you can call me Beans. Everybody does.
This is our road! Our road!
If you can't feel pain, no one can hurt you.
Ah!
Hello, Tracey.
Hello.
So in the most simplest terms, Beans is a coming-of-age story that is set during the 1990 Oka crisis. But more intimately, more specifically, this is your story. I mean, you were a child during that 1990 Oka crisis. Talk to me about when did you decide to make that story a film, and how, like, the inception, the process, the genesis. Tell me about that.
Sure. So this is actually a project that's 30 years in the making for me, because I decided I wanted to become a filmmaker when I was 12 years old, and I had just lived through the Oka crisis. And I thought, like, this would be an amazing film to tell this story through the point of view of a child, because the way I lived it, very different than the way an adult lived it, and very different than the way Canadians lived it. So it's always been in my head as like the dream project, but also a very intimidating project. And I think for the longest time, the story to myself was, I'm not ready, I'm not ready, I'm not ready. And it also actually took a really long time to actually get right here, because I started writing it years ago and had difficulty revisiting that time, a lot of writer's block, a lot of avoidance. Sometimes even just physical reactions. If I sat down to work on the script, depending on the scenes I was writing, I would physically like start shaking. There's one really, really pivotal scene in the movie, which is a trauma, the biggest trauma I've ever experienced in my life, that I had a really hard time writing. And when I finally pushed myself to do it, I sobbed the entire time I was writing, because it really was pulled directly from my memory to what I saw, what my mother said, what my sister did in that moment. And so to remember it and have to write it, it was like experiencing it all over again. And then of course we had to shoot it, which was very difficult. I've been editing it and watching it again and again and again and again. And it never got easier. And I think that's a testament to the effect that trauma does have. I mean, it sticks, it stays, and it has a lasting impact.
No, it's
So
funny.
I've gone off the rails a little bit from your original question, but it took many years to write it, and then we finally got to make it. So 30 years in the making. It's really exciting.
Yeah. Well, no, but I mean, I want to kind of expand on that, because it's so funny when you say you're not ready, you're not ready, you're not ready, because we have this common perception, or I have this common perception of Canadian cinema where, it's everyone makes their film about growing up at a cottage. And that's all usually, whether that's their first film or whatever, that's what we see often and regularly. And it's always kind of the same kind of homogenous type of demographic that is representing this. Meanwhile, you have you wanting to make your coming of age story, which is typically the kind of thing people first dive into, but you are now afraid of approaching that. Are you internalizing a sort of, like when you say it's not ready, are you also just, is that the landscape ready for this kind of story, to embrace this kind of story? Is that what concerns you in some way?
So no, that it was always very personal.
Mm-hmm.
The Oka crisis is a massive historical event that has had massive implications for my own people, but I think for Indigenous people across Canada. And how do you tackle that story and do it well and do it justice? That was a huge pressure. And then also just the personal component and revisiting that time. And I would say yes to your question in that but again, making it really part of my own struggle. How do I tell this story in a way to engage Canadians and to make them care? That's what I ultimately want. I want them to care. I needed people to care about me 30 years ago for those things to not happen. And I never want them to happen again. So how do I inspire that level of caring and have them leave the film feeling the drive to become our allies, to help things get better? So that's the big goal. But how now do I accomplish that through the storytelling? Just a massive pressure. And always the self-questioning of like, is it there? Is it there? Maybe this, try this. We went through so many drafts, and it was necessary to take the time it took, because I also grew tremendously during that time. I was working on Mohawk Girls. We had 5 seasons. I learned a lot there. But also I also do a lot of personal development. I do a lot of therapy, and that really helped me process that time in my life and what it is I wanted to share.
Mm-hmm.
So that was more the barrier than is the world ready? Now, I've never shied away from telling the stories I want to tell based on, is anyone ready? Because if that were the case, I would not be telling stories, because I don't know that the majority aren't ready. But if we're not putting it out there, they'll never be challenged to become ready, in a sense. So that was not a concern, but I will say that the film we set out to make in the fall, which was it's a historical film about, hey, this happened 30 years ago, and hey, let's not forget, and hey, this is what it's like to be an Indigenous person in this country. It is hostile, it is scary. What can we do about that together? That was the film we went into production on in the fall. Now the film coming out this year, with what is going on in the world and finally the attention the rest of the world is paying to these issues, I'm really excited, because I do feel that the world is open and ready for this story. So it all just kind of happened. Mm-hmm. And again, this has been like a 10-year sort of in the making. So it all has aligned. And I'm hoping that the film can have the impact that I so desperately wanted to have.
Yeah. Well, I've had these conversations about like with the indigenous filmmakers about just how there's a lack of support for Indigenous feature filmmaking, statistically, right? There's a rich short film community, but it took a long time for Indigenous filmmakers to make that leap into feature filmmaking. Where did you find your supports? How did you? I know it took a long time, but in the end, how did you get it together to get this movie made?
That's a great question. I think that's more of a producer question, quite frankly. Everybody we approach, I can say this, everybody that we approached with the film, and we have multiple partners that came on, everyone was excited and enthusiastic from the beginning. And again, this was a long, drawn out process, Those partners were behind it the whole time. My producer, Anne-Marie Julina of Emma Films, never gave up on me. And I'm really grateful for that, because there are times when the self-sabotage was at play, and I was giving the opportunities for people to give up on me, and nobody ever did. And I really credit my producer and those partners for sticking with it and giving me that chance to find my way as a storyteller to get right here. So lots of partners, lots of support, lots of allies. It's been a really incredible process.
Okay, interesting. Because I mean, like when you mentioned allies and support, I mean, I think that also extends to in terms of like authorship. It's great that you're getting to tell this story, right? Because we have this conversation about who gets to tell what stories. You know, you have situations where maybe people find it. It's a great opportunity right now to tell Indigenous stories even without an Indigenous person behind the camera, right, to tell that story. But the other part of it is, how do you make sure that that Indigenous person who's behind the camera still feels supported and empowered to make the right decisions and doesn't feel like, so how did you create that safe space to tell this story the way that you wanted to tell this story?
That's a good question. I'm very careful about the partners and the collaborators. I've been in the business now for 20 years. And when you find the right people that speak the same language, that come in it with the same heart, beautiful things happen. I mean, the work just gets elevated. So finding the right people to partner with has been incredibly important. And my co-writer, Meredith Vuchnik, we've been together for 6 years now working on this, and she's just been instrumental in the support for me to figure out my story and for us together to build something that we're both, I think, really, really proud of. So finding those partners, it's super, super important to me. And it's all about energy, and it's all about goals. It's about bigger picture. It's about why are we doing what we're doing. I don't do this as work. I mean, this is my dream. I have fun, and I work to make sure it's fun all the time. And so I want other people around me who also love what they do. And that's my secret sauce.
Yeah. But tell me about casting, finding little Tracey, finding Beans, like finding that right person who could shoulder a lot in terms of telling this story. Where do you even begin?
Well, we began with a national open call because there are not as many Indigenous young people sort of in the system. So it was an open call. We had kids auditioning from across the country, sending in their tapes. It was amazing to see all this talent and all this enthusiasm. We ultimately, and we had four child roles to cast. But of course, Beans, the lead, she's in every single scene. The whole film is told through her point of view. So she's in every single scene. And it's one thing to write that. It looks, it reads well. It's a whole nother thing to shoot it. Once you have to find that child, that young person who's ready to do that. We ended up with a short list for all of the 4 characters, and we brought them all into Toronto. We did a weekend workshop with Malie Hutton, acting coach, and she took them through. It was really like an acting 101 workshop where they were learning all different types of acting. I don't want to say tricks, that's not the right thing, but an acting workshop. I'll just leave it at that. And I was just present. I was present, and I was able to watch them through these activities. And then at the end of those 2 days, we did a second audition with them. And then from there, narrowed it down. And Gawadio, she is Beans. I could feel it, the emotional depth that this young woman has, and the courage to share it. It's something very, very special. And I think it's on full display in the film, and I hope people really enjoy an incredible performance by her.
Well, I'm just wondering, like, is it also like, are there precautions you have to take? Because I mean, you're finding this talented girl and stuff, right? But like you said, this is recreating a traumatic moment of your life. So I mean, on the one hand, this is a great opportunity for a young girl to like learn more about her history, learn more about her tradition, but also learn more about the trauma that is being passed along and these events. Like, how does I don't even know what the question should be there. Like, but how do you just dive into that?
But
Yeah.
because it was a massive concern for me. I wanted to tell the truth. I wanted to reveal what this summer was like for us on the inside. But as I said, very traumatic. And there isn't just one traumatic incident in the film. There are multiple. And it was so important to me that in the creation process of this movie, that we are not replicating that trauma. I'm not okay with that. There's, if that's going to happen, then we shouldn't be doing it. So the challenge for me was, how do we tell this story and make sure that we're all safe and that we're not, like, especially these kids are not leaving this film damaged in any way. I mean, it needed to be something we were proud of, we were excited about, and that we had a wonderful time making. But when you see it on screen, all cut together, it's effective. And I worked really hard to do that. For the traumatic scenes in particular, it often involved a lot of extras, a lot of non-Indigenous extras. And I would speak with them all at the beginning of the day to let them know. Often extras, they show up for set and they have no idea what they're even there to do. And then they sort of get told throughout the day what they're up to. Anyway, that's not what I wanted. I wanted to have, I spoke with them all at the beginning of the day to explain what the day was going to be, how heavy it was going to be, not only for them, but for all of us, including myself, having lived through these things. And I asked them to, one, bring their all, because the deeper and darker that they go, the better chance we have at having an impact when the film comes out. But then I also ask them that in between the action and cut moments, outside of action and cut, I needed their help to keep the energy and the vibe on set positive. See, I'm getting a little choked up. They were wonderful. They were all so wonderful. So in between the difficult parts, they would wave, they would cheer, I would come out to them and I would tell them they're doing a great job, and we would do the wave and like just keep it fun and light in between those moments. So that's one thing that they did for me time and time again in these big scenes. But also with my stars and my main kids, it was figuring out how to shoot it so that they were there the least time possible, and how to shoot it where they actually weren't witnessing the magnitude of the full scene. So arranging my shots so that I had my shots on them and they're giving me wonderful performances that you'd think they're seeing everything, but instead they're seeing all of the extras standing around smiling and like positive. There's no, and I won't reveal because I don't want to say too much, but and then the kids would go back to their trailers and they're hanging out and they're having a good time, and then we would shoot the more disturbing things without them there. So that was a big part of the plan, which I think we executed well. And then there are other ways as well in terms of shooting with body doubles. So whenever possible, the kids didn't have to be there, and the body doubles were adults. So the body doubles weren't just other kids. Yeah, there was a whole bunch of different things that I did, and it was one of my top concerns and a very big challenge as a director to, one, get what I needed, but two, make sure we were all not only okay, that we were all having a good time and feeling positive about what we were doing.
So that was our series, a spotlight on Canadian talent at TIFF. Thank you for supporting this, Telefilm Canada, and thank you, Aisling Chin-Yee, Chase Joynt, Charles Officer, and Tracey Deer for being part of these conversations. And thank you everyone for joining us and listening, and have a great festival.